Yeah, thanks for being here and being interested. My name is Paul Belanger. I work with Keepers of the Water. I play the role of science advisor for the organization. So I've got the fun job of reading technical reports and trying to figure out what industry is doing with their good science and their bad science. And so it's a bit of a cat and mouse game that I'm playing. So what I'll need is somebody to switch the slides for me as we go. Yeah, and that'd be great. That's on that computer. So one thing came up last week, and it's just another example of what we've been dealing with. A large earthquake in Alberta. I'm sure everybody's heard the news. And right away when the earthquake occurred, I was, as usual, suspicious that there might be some oil field activity involved with it. So I went onto Google Maps, and not only did I find a couple of wells right there where the earthquake occurred, but there was a very large heavy oil in situ operation there involving hundreds of injection wells. So I was quite stunned to see that. But the thing that stunned me the most is that whatever we heard from the Alberta Energy Regulator or from NRCan, Natural Resources Canada, the geology people, the geophysicists, they mentioned absolutely nothing about that large oil field on top of that earthquake and series of earthquakes. And to me, it looked intentional because they kept claiming this is natural. They said, they always would paraphrase saying that this earthquake is likely due to natural causes. There's some injection well or wells in the area, but they're too shallow. They wouldn't have no impact on this very deep earthquake. And so, as it turned out, it is just another example of what I would call a cover-up or minimization of the impact of industry. It's been well known for a few years now that shallow injection can cause deep earthquakes, very deep earthquakes, and that an earthquake can occur miles away from the injection point. So here we have a main earthquake and then pre-shocks and aftershocks that are right on top of the field or very, very close. So I'll go back to my prepared presentation here. Next slide, please. Okay, so this text here didn't translate well off my software. So general conclusion, this is a fact well established by observations from First Nations for decades, as well as ethical scientists. The Athabasca watershed and surrounding lands have been damaged by ongoing industry and climate change impacts. And then now the oil sands industry wants to discharge treated tailings into the Athabasca River. They now want to start using the Athabasca River as a sewer on top of the existing damage that has not been dealt with properly. Next, please. Next slide, yeah. So so our intention here as a group is to address this issue and be involved in the discussions, and we are to a certain extent engaging with different organizations, and so are other First Nations groups, numerous groups, trying to deal with this issue and come up with a better solution than turning the river as a sewer. And what we're doing at the same time, though, is showing and looking at the cumulative impacts from at least the past 40 years or more like 50 years, and point out to everyone and point out to industry that we have a problem with the current impacts, and let alone considering some growth or suddenly now in discharging millions of cubic meters of partially treated tailings, toxic tailings. So Pretty. Next slide, please. So this is what this is a slide presented by Syncrude that I've used. So what it's showing is simply their strategy. They've come up with a very low-cost way to partially treat the tailings, and this is part of their proposal to the government. What they're looking to do is simply take their waste coke, which is just extra carbon taken out of the heavy bitumen, and use it as activated carbon, run the oil sands tailings water through it, let it sit for a bit, and then throw it and then dump it into the river. So what we found is that there's, or actually what they've reported is next slide, please. What they reported is still problems. I think the reporting has some integrity, especially the last round of reporting where they've had to reveal more information. So I've seen this presentation 3 times, and the first 2 times they were what I didn't know. There was some information that was missing, but in the last presentation we have more complete information. So you can see here, this is their pilot project where they're proposing the treatment. So on the right-hand side with the yellow highlighter is the treatment area, and the bottom of that big pond is where the activated carbon is. And on the left, the treated water is pumped there to sit and then discharge into the river. So there's a variety of problems, including the fact that there's no oxygen left in the treated water, and then because there's some ammonia left, not all taken out, it turns into a big algae pond. Next slide, please. So this is what there's no independent information on this. We're just counting on Syncrude's data. So these are all the problems left. This is what might, if somehow the regulators allowed this process, this is what would go into the river. Plenty of salt, very high pH of the material, no oxygen, algae, not to mention warm water. And then also one very nasty substance, naphthenic acid, which is known to be a carcinogenic and also a hormone copycat as well. So that means causes great trouble for eggs and fetuses. And then they admit too that there's still 3 heavy metals that are too high in what they've come up with so far. So next slide, please. So on top of the concern about dumping this tailings into the river, we've got something new over the past few years that we weren't aware of until recently. Suncor is now drilling disposal wells, and they're looking to dispose of 15% of their tailings water in these disposal wells. And we're still trying to get the information how deep they are, but they seem, the preliminary one well information I looked at, the well is too shallow, which means it's too close to drinking water or fresh water near the surface. And so they're looking to drill numerous wells in a huge area around their operation there. So this is the map they've shared with us. And you can see one figure there, 1.3 million cubic meters is total annual disposal in one area in just 2018. So, and that's increasing every year. It's interesting here that they haven't recorded 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022. So, next slide, please. And then this is the final solution that the industry is looking at in terms of how to deal with the waste sites, the waste sand and silt that they would never be able to discharge or deal with, or they're looking just to cover them up and turn them into lakes. So just take the old mine pits, leave the material at the bottom, fill it with water, and call it a man-made lake, and family can go there on Sundays. Next slide, please. So another issue we've got, and we've known about this since roughly 2016, 2017, is some of the tailings ponds are leaking, and we have an approximate idea of which ponds and how much, but we don't have detailed information, and we have just estimates. We're looking at 6 million liters a day of leachate leaching into the groundwater, and then where that groundwater goes, of course, it's in the Athabasca watershed. So this is a great concern as well. Next slide, please. And this is why all these discussions are going on right now, is because the industry is growing. They're producing more tailings waste every year, and they want to ramp up production. And so the volume is increasing dramatically. You can see here in 2005, from 2005 to 2013 here, how much the volume is growing. And then if you look at 2021, again, there's still the same exponential growth. It's when you look at it, one scratches your head, and this is out of control. So they're in trouble. The industry needs to finally spend some money and do something with their wastewater, and they're trying to avoid that by drilling disposal wells and then dumping into the river. Next slide, please. So the impacts are not just on water, directly to groundwater and watersheds. There's also a massive amount of air pollution and acid rain produced by the operations. When you consider all the operations, like the mining and the in situ, they all burn a lot of methane for the heat that's required for their processes. And so we have measured impacts now in Treaty 10, Treaty 8, Treaty 11. Next slide, please. So this one just shows the impacts on in Saskatchewan. So this is a map of northern Saskatchewan, and the red area on the right indicates an area where 11,000 lakes, big and small, are impacted by acid rain and at a critical point of dying. So, and one reason why those lakes are fragile there is they're sitting on the Canadian Shield. They don't have as much a buffer as lakes with deep soil underneath them. So they're acidifying, and they have been acidifying for 30 to 40 years, accumulated emissions from the oil sands. If you look at a map of the plume of SO2 emissions from the oil sands, you'd see it goes, typically if the wind's blowing strong from the west, the plume reaches Manitoba. And I look at the map all the time. There's a live website providing the information. Sometimes the plume will reach Baffin Island. It is a massive tonnage per day of sulfur dioxide. Next slide, please. So it's pretty hard to know all the impacts because, for one thing, there's a lack of monitoring. We get a lot of information from First Nations observations. We've gotten a lot of information from ethical scientists the past 20, 25 years, but we do know that there are serious health issues in the area, not just upstream, but around around Fort McMurray. Asthma is, at one point in time, I'm not sure if these figures are still true, but at one point, Fort McMurray had the highest rate of asthma in Canada. Probably would likely still does have the highest rate. Yeah, we have photos and examples of tumors in fish and moose, and one study from about 2 years ago showed that there's quite a coating of deposition, sort of dust on the plants and the berries. The berries have to be washed really well because there's heavy metals now in that dust on the berries, and some of the berries are absorbing those metals. So there's nothing could be done there. Those berries in terms of making them healthy enough to eat. So we have you know, a long-term history of what I would call half-assed monitoring or partial monitoring of some of the substances. But generally, it's not comprehensive, and then whatever is monitored, we've had a hard time getting the data, and if we do get the data, it's presented in a way where you have to, you know how to read their funny charts, and or you know, the data is very old. Next slide, please. So there's been a lot of complaints too from a lot of different fronts, not only First Nation communities, but scientists that are concerned that the reclamation rate of the previous work done, like the empty pits, is just not happening. There's just a very tiny percentage of the impacted area that has been reclaimed and replanted. I don't know the number, but it's as low as 1 or 2%. It's very, very, very low. And then what they're looking to do is just keep the profits high for their shareholders and whatnot, and they're proposing really low cost, in some cases unproven technologies, such as the infant lake, to offer their solutions for closure. And right now, the Alberta Energy Regulator is just fine with this. In fact, they seem to be enabling the industry to continue with this whole approach of do as little as possible and just delay it as long as possible. So the regulator is not demanding any bond money for cleanup to any extent once the mines are closed. There's just a token amount of money in a bank account right now, and the energy regulator is allowing the value of the oil in the ground to be used as a bond. Jesus. Yeah, so they're allowing the public's the capital or public's value to be used as their bond. Yeah. So, and one issue too, what we've noticed is, in the past 10, 20 years, there's been part of the First Nation community digging into this and gaining great knowledge and awareness of the issues. But there's also a great number of the population of the North, Indigenous or not, who are not aware of the extent of the problems. And the government is not very interested in informing anyone about the problems. In fact, there's examples of them interrupting efforts to inform the public. So it seems as like the regulators would prefer just to keep everyone in the dark because they don't want people to upset. So there's a real problem with the status quo, and the current political status quo means that there is no solution. So how do we go forward? Next slide, please. So what we really need is to really apply full engagement, aggressive engagement with industry and government. Use whatever strength comes out of UNDRIP to be more involved in discussions and actions. Next slide, please. Yeah, I think what's needed is there's just no way we can allow the accountants of Suncor and the other companies to design ecological reclamation projects, because those accountants are simply looking at cost. So what we need at least is good science and ideally First Nations people, experts, with the tech knowledge to actually do the work. We need to pull it away from industry, and First Nations and scientists need to actually design the reclamation, what it costs, and do something right.